Hello everyone, welcome to this training for Respect Marshals ahead of the season 24-25. This presentation is designed to give you some information, some guidance, some advice, some tips and some more detail around the Respect Marshal expectation. Perhaps your club is new to having Respect Marshals on our touchline, but hopefully this short presentation will give you all the information that you need ahead of the new season. This concept might be obviously new to some of you, but also aware that for other clubs and for other leagues, they've had Respect Marshals in for some time. So this presentation and the information within it is not necessarily meant to replace that. I'm fully aware that some leagues have training events and training schedules for Respect Marshals. And just to reiterate that this information is not to replace that in any way, shape or form. If anything, it's there to supplement it, but especially for teams, clubs, leagues that haven't had this concept in place or a mandatory requirement previously. Hopefully it's good information for you ahead of the start of the new season. This information is also for anyone involved in the football community, so it's not necessarily specifically for Respect Marshals. It can be shared with club officials, players, managers, coaches, club committees. The information is very transparent for all, so not just for Respect Marshals, anyone. The information is applicable to all people involved in the football community. Firstly, as you can see on the slide, wanted to share really around our new Matchday environments, and delighted to say that all Lincolnshire leagues that have youth leagues are affiliated to this, which is a really, really positive step in the right direction. So the whole concept around a positive Matchday environment, as you can see there, involves a number of different things. The Respect Marshals are applicable to one specific element, but as you can see, there are also demands on teams around having no spectators behind goals, for example, technical areas where there's a maximum number of coaches on the other touchline, a physical respect barrier in place, and that's when Respect Marshals come into play in terms of spectators behind that respect barrier. But you may see some dialogue, some materials, some resources coming out at the head of the new season around the new positive Matchday environments, and hopefully this presentation will explain the key role that Respect Marshals will have within that environment, but also why potentially we're looking to put them into place. So trying to keep the information really, really simple and concise, I've divided this into three sections around what, who and why in terms of the Respect Marshal. So who are they, and what do they do, and why have we got that in place? So a Respect Marshal is an identified person who oversees the conduct of their own spectators. I think that's really important to establish first and foremost, that we're not asking that person to oversee the conduct of opposition spectators or get involved in conduct or misconduct from anyone from the other team. We're just asking them to oversee the conduct of their own spectators. And they will be expected to de-escalate any rising tensions amongst their own. So anything that they notify or can see, or that perhaps is triggered during a game where there's some rising tensions, we want that person to try and de-escalate that situation. So we don't necessarily want action after an event has happened. We want some de-escalation within that, and I'll talk about that detail in a minute. It's very much a preventative measure rather than a reactive measure. So yes, you know, there is a Respect Marshal in place, but we don't want that person solely to be the person that deals with a scenario after the event. We want that person to feel empowered and confident to try and prevent any rising tensions escalating into further issues. And we'll talk about some of the issues that we did have in the county later on. If there are no rising tensions to manage, and I think it's really important to establish at this stage that that is very much the case across Lincolnshire football, and particularly in youth football, that a huge majority of games pass with no problem at all. So if there are no rising tensions to manage, which I'm sure you would all experience that, you know, generally speaking, most of the time that is the case, there are no other expectations on that Respect Marshal. So a good proportion of games, a Respect Marshal might find they have nothing to do in relation to that particular role. And that's really, really also, you know, important to establish that we're not asking this person to have to do with something or have to deal with something every single game. You know, if there are incidents every single game, then that's obviously an issue for the club to be able to address. But, you know, from our experience, and I'm sure your experience, the vast majority of youth football games in the county pass with no issue. So if that continues to be the case, there are no other expectations on that Respect Marshal. The Respect Marshal can be anyone identified by the club. We would probably normally associate that person to be a club official, a parent, or a committee member, but we would expect them to be a responsible adult. They don't need an FA DBS or any other DBS. or they don't need to have completed a safeguarding children course. The club may wish to obviously put that in place, but there's no expectation that that person has to have those qualifications. Really, ideally, we want that person to be responsible enough to be able to act and deal with the situation, prevent a situation escalating when that arises, and have the skill set and confidence to do that. And like I said, they don't necessarily need a full CV of FA related qualifications in order to do that role. They are expected, however, to be identified and known to the spectators and match official. I think that's really, really important. We are looking to supply bibs across the county. We're waiting for those to arrive from a supplier, but identified and known is really our minimum expectation. So that could be through a bib, obviously, of a high vis vest, jacket, a lanyard of some description. But as long as that person is clearly identified and they're known to their own spectators and the match official, that is the minimum requirement for the respect marshals within this initiative. So there might be individual club and league expectations in addition to that, but as a minimum, that person needs to be identified and known to their own spectators and the match official. So why are we looking to put this in place, and why has this become a mandatory requirement within this initiative? So just to give you some background, there were 80 misconduct reports from youth football last season, which specifically involved spectators. So there were around about 320-ish misconduct reports from the whole of youth football last season through varying roles and different incidences, but 80 of those were specifically involved spectators. Which is obviously 80 too many, really, from our perspective. I think it's really important also to establish that that led to over £4,000 in fines for clubs. So when there is a parent spectator issue, because they don't have a designated role in football, they're not the ones that has that is directly responsible for that fine. It would sit with the club. The club obviously can take action against that parent if they wish, but essentially that's a lot of money that clubs are paying out for poor spectator conduct. And please remember that that's in youth football. That figure rises when we go into senior football and open age football, but for junior youth football specifically, we had 80 misconduct reports that were specifically related to spectators, which led to over £4,000 in fines. That's simply not sustainable, and we don't want to continue doing that. We want those numbers to come down to a much more manageable level. You might have seen, but we also conducted a large survey across youth participants in football at the end of last season, where we had 500 responses to that, which was a really, really positive thing. One of the unfortunate things, there's lots of positives that came out of that survey, but one thing to link to this particular initiative is that 1/3 of 7 to 12-year-olds, because the questionnaire was differentiated, but 1/3 of them felt that adult conduct could get better. So that's from the 7 to 12-year-old category. 1/3 of them felt that adult conduct could get better. When we moved into the 13 to 18-year-old category, they made specific references to poor adult spectator conduct. A number of them, 1/3 again of them, could make specific and did make specific references to poor adult spectator conduct that they have experienced. And when we think about the numbers that are responding to that survey, you know, that again is far, far too many young people from the age of 7 all the way up to 18 who can reference really, really poor adult conduct in the game. And that's very much spoiling their experience. So we really want to do something about that to address that. And the respect marshals we see as a really, really key element to the spectator issue that we have. Okay, moving on to some context then, some additional information which might help you within this role or help you as a club support the implementation of this role. So what should they do? So for me, they should be approachable and calm when necessary. You know, they're not going to have to be dealing with things every 5 minutes, but when they do have to de-escalate a situation, they should very much be approachable and calm. And de-escalation is really, really key. And if you can communicate calmly and clearly, de-escalation is much easier. And I'll talk about what they shouldn't do in a minute, but the opposite to that means that often things are not de-escalated. So calm, clear communication, positive, approachable body language always helps when trying to deal with a challenging circumstance. So that respect marshal should be aware to challenge and confident to challenge circumstances where verbal or body language becomes either heated, beyond the line of acceptance. So I would really hope to know or be aware that people know what the line of acceptance is within their club. But when that is breached or there's some aggressive behaviour, perhaps escalating, that they do challenge at that point. It's also important that they provide proactive resolutions at that point, whether that's, 30 seconds just away from the touchline to speak to that particular person. So they're not trying to address that conduct in front of everyone else. Perhaps going for a little bit of a walk with that person away from the touchline for a period of time, talking to them about something more positive, or giving them some form of proactive resolution is really, really important. Not giving them an ultimatum straight away. I think trying to find proactive resolutions is really, really important at that stage. Okay, leading on to what they shouldn't do. And again, I appreciate that some of this perhaps is common sense, but really want to make sure it's that people feel confident and empowered that they can complete this particular role. But persistently draw attention to themselves. There's no need. It's like a referee in a game. If you don't necessarily notice a referee, then they're doing a really, really good job. So not necessarily drawing attention to themselves throughout the game. So they don't need to be shouting from the rooftops about who they are or what they're doing, but someone who comes in and efficiently challenges something and de-escalates an issue when it happens is a really, really positive scenario. But that person doesn't need to persistently draw attention to themselves. They don't need to attempt to challenge the opposition spectators. We're not asking them to do that. We just think that leads to further conflict because essentially that's someone they don't know or someone they perhaps have not met before. So RMs shouldn't be looking to challenge the opposition spectators. Now, if a child is obviously at immediate risk of abuse or harm, then we'd want anyone to be involved in that scenario and stopping that scenario. But for context within a touchline, perhaps rising tensions, there's no need for an RM to go and get involved with the opposition spectators. They shouldn't then challenge conduct themselves by shouting themselves or making unnecessary physical contact, giving ultimatums that cannot be fulfilled. So if you don't do this, this is going to happen. That is something we'd want to have as a real last resort. So don't give people ultimatums straight away that can't be fulfilled. And also don't meet fire with fire. If you've got someone that is rising in terms of tension, body language, perhaps the language they're using verbally, don't meet that with shouting yourself or raising your voice yourself. It's very important to go back to the approachability and calmness that's necessary here. And also act after an event. If that event was preventable, such as one particular parent getting a little bit agitated, if we can nip that in the bud with proactive resolutions initially, then that's far better than acting after an event has happened. So some additional advice into that, it's really important that the respect marshal works in conjunction with the referee. So the referee might ask that person for support with a particular spectator. If that spectator is raising their voice towards the referee, shouting at the referee, appealing for things unnecessarily, all of those things that perhaps do happen, the referee may ask the respect marshal for some support with that. Now, I'd like to think that the respect marshal would notice that initially and be proactive in challenging that before the referee has to. But if there are examples where the referee asks for support, they may need that from the respect marshal. I think it's also advice really to flip this around to positive touchline cultures. And I think it's really, really easy to establish positive touchline cultures just through positive comments. Hello, how are you? How was your weekend? Parents supporting good play from both teams, supporting initiatives. So Play Safe Weekend, which is coming up at the end of September. Great weekend to get some positivity onto those touchlines. Silent support weekends, and we're fully aware that there's obviously some split opinion around those weekends, but the children specifically tell us that they enjoy those weekends. So they're not obviously every weekend. It happens once, twice a season. But in getting yourself involved with those weekends can really flip the narrative to the positive. And I think it's quite easy to actually establish positive cultures if they're done all the time. It's not something that's going to change overnight, but been to some brilliant clubs who have had some fantastic touchline cultures just through positivity and people chatting, talking, supporting good play. I think they're really, really easy to establish if they're done all of the time. I think it's also important to address that respect marshals can seek support if they need it. So very much if they don't feel supported or if they feel a parent has not particularly complied with what they need to or what they should do, then they should be informing their club about that. And if you're a club official watching this, I think it's really important that your respect marshals feel supported when something does happen. So please look to address that. And again, I'm always here available for support if necessary. So please make sure that they are supported and people are aware if there are issues that do arise. Another piece of advice really, that just so that that pressure isn't necessarily all on one person, the role doesn't have to be the same person all season. That role could be rotated amongst the parent body or amongst club officials or club committee members. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same person all the time, which might be advisable in terms of giving them a bit of a break from that particular role. But it's a role that can be rotated as long as whoever is fulfilling that role understands what they're doing. I think it's important to establish that that role doesn't have to be the same. It can be rotated amongst a group of people throughout the season. And going back to what I said earlier, I think it's also important to establish, if you have a positive culture at your club, the vast majority of the time, if not all of the time, that person is not going to have to do anything in relation to this particular role. So hopefully that has given you some additional context about the role and some support and advice about it. If you don't think that you have, or if you have a question that you don't think has been answered within this, please don't hesitate to get in contact. My name is Ben Pearce. I'm the safeguarding officer here at the Lincolnshire Football Association. On the bottom left-hand side of that screen is our website. Please nip onto there if you need to contact myself or contact any other member of the team. We're here to help. So please, if you do have any questions, give us a shout. And hopefully this is something that can be really, really positive across Lincolnshire grassroots youth football in the season 24-25. Many thanks.